At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? My name's Carol. Let's begin. The royal throne shook beneath Queen Zenora as yet another quake from the volcanic eruption struck Dranik City's palace, cracking the ceiling and sprinkling dust across her still vibrant black hair. The royal advisors, the guards, and even the scarred merchants froze in place, bracing for one of Zenora's legendary fits of rage. But the middle-aged queen only sighed and pretended she hadn't noticed the eruption at all. The maids hurried forward, their soft slippers whispering against the cold floor as they swept and brushed the fallen dust from the queen's hair and shoulders. Their hands trembled, careful not to draw her ire. Yet Zenora remained unmoved, her gaze fixed on the cracked ceiling as if it were beneath her notice. At last she spoke, her voice calm but edged with bitterness. "At least young Kellen was returned to Earth," she said, "and does not have to suffer the curse of this planet any longer." The throne room plunged into an awkward, suffocating silence. Zenora watched without a lot of interest as the merchant nearest to her, a stout Lovarian with the typical deep blue skin of their species, nearly dropped the imported grain samples he'd been presenting. His hands, the same blue shade as all their people, fumbled to maintain his grip. The guards stationed along the walls shifted their weight, their ceremonial armor clinking softly. She could see their pointed ears becoming tense, a sure sign of discomfort among her kind. Royal Advisor Zohik's face, normally a healthy sapphire blue, paled to an almost grayish tint. The worry lines around his red eyes deepened as he processed her words. She watched him calculate the political ramifications, could practically see the gears turning in that old mind of his. He rushed forward, his elderly frame moving with surprising agility, the gold chains of his office bouncing against his chest. He performed a slight bow, bringing himself close enough that she could smell the medicinal herbs he chewed for his chronic cough, a common affliction now that their air grew more toxic each year. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice barely audible above the distant rumble of another quake. "Saying Kellen's name is not a good idea. Maybe we might discuss this when the grain shipments from the northern provinces. The merchants have traveled far, and—" His red eyes darted meaningfully toward the back of the room, where three figures stood apart from the others, their clothing bearing the silver insignia of her sister's house. "Princess Thara's representatives are present today. Certain family matters, particularly regarding your adopted son, might be misinterpreted." Zenora studied Zohik's face, noting how he struggled to say Kellen's name. After 15 years, they still treated her adopted son like some shameful secret. The thought ignited something cold and sharp in her chest. She laughed, the sound bouncing off the damaged walls, loud by her deliberate choice. Rising slightly from her throne, she made sure her voice would reach every corner of the vast chamber. "My dear sister has nothing to fear." The merchant stepped back as if her sharp words were meant for them. "I have no intention of allowing my adopted son to inherit this kingdom of quakes, ashes, and an increasingly toxic atmosphere that grows worse with every passing day." She stood fully now, her height commanding even at her age. "Tell my sister, since I know you report everything to her anyway." She looked directly at the three representatives, whose blue faces had gone rigid with shock at being so openly acknowledged. "That her precious bloodline won't be tainted by human succession. Her children can inherit this dying rock and all its glory. Every collapsed mine, every poisoned river, every citizen who dies choking on volcanic ash. It will all be theirs." The throne room became a tableau of frozen figures. Zenora could read their thoughts in the way their pointed ears angled backward, in the way they avoided her gaze. She knew exactly what they saw when they looked at her. The barren queen, who had failed in her most fundamental duty. The fool who had found a human child in a crashed escape pod 15 years ago and had made the incomprehensible decision to keep him. She remembered their faces during those excruciating months of legal battles with Earth's custody courts. How they'd whispered when she'd submitted to human psychological evaluations, cultural training, and home inspections. All broadcast across the galaxy's news networks. The mighty queen of Loveria, reduced to begging human judges for permission to raise an orphan child. Her sister had called it the greatest humiliation in their planet's history. And perhaps it was. But they hadn't seen Kellen's eyes when she'd pulled him from that pod. Terrified. Alone. Speaking a language she didn't understand, but clutching her hand like she was his only anchor in the universe. "You all think me weak," Zenora said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. She looked at each face in turn. The merchants who avoided her gaze. The guards who stared straight ahead. Her sister's spies who were probably memorizing every word. The infertile queen, who spent a decade playing mother to an alien child, while her sister built power bases and groomed her own offspring for succession. She stepped down from the throne's dais, her boots clicking against the cold floor that had once been pristine white, but was now permanently stained gray from volcanic ash. "You whisper about how I taught him our language before his own, how I attended his human school ceremonies while our traditions crumbled, how I spent treasury funds on human tutors and Earth food shipments to keep him healthy." A younger guard near the door, barely out of training by the look of his unmarred blue skin, actually flinched when she walked past him. Zenora found it absurdly funny. "You're all stupid if you think I care about royal succession." Her voice rose to a roar that made the damaged ceiling rain more dust. "Look around you. The magma rivers beneath our feet grow stronger daily. Last month, we lost the entire southern district of Dranic City to a fissure. Our birth rates have dropped to nearly zero because our bodies know. They know this planet is dying." She spun to face them, her royal robes billowing. "I'm grateful. Do you hear me? Grateful that my son Kellen belongs to a powerful species that doesn't have to live on this poorly terraformed rock the Federation tossed at us like scraps to beggars. At least I have one child saved. And loved as if he were my own blood. He will survive what's coming." The admission hung in the air thick. Several of the merchants exchanged glances, and she saw something shift in their expressions. Perhaps pity, perhaps understanding, perhaps just shock that their queen had admitted to loving the human boy. "There will be no more royal audiences today," she announced. "Everyone is dismissed. Now!" The throne room emptied in a hardly controlled stampede. Merchants scrambled to pack their wares, one dropping a container that shattered on the floor, spreading preserved foods across the marble. Nobody stopped to help him collect them. The guards filed out in a formation that only partially concealed their eagerness to leave. Her sister's representatives practically ran, their recording devices clutched in their hands like prizes. Within minutes, only Zohic and her personal maids remained. The advisor stood like a statue, his aged face unreadable. The four maids, young females barely past their 20s, huddled together near the wall, unsure whether to approach or flee. Zenora walked to the massive window that dominated the eastern wall. The glass, imported at ridiculous expense from off-world, provided a panoramic view of Dranic City, or what remained of it, where once there had been elegant spires of pink crystal and gardens of alien plants. Now there were mostly ruins and emergency shelters. Another pillar of black smoke rose in the distance, probably from the industrial district. The volcanoes were claiming another factory, another few hundred jobs, another piece of their civilization. "Your Majesty," one of the maids, Kira, the boldest of them, stepped forward, offering a breathing mask to the Queen. "The toxicity readings are especially high today. Please." Zenora didn't turn from the window. "No." "Your Majesty." Zohik's voice was carefully neutral. "You should be mindful of your health. The volcanic gases have increased by 30% in the last cycle. The medical board recommends..." "The medical board recommends many things," Zenora interrupted. "They recommended I take fertility treatments for 40 years. They recommended I choose an heir for my sister's children. They recommended I send Kellen back to Earth when he was 10, and again when he was 15, and again when he turned 18. She pressed her hand against the cool glass. "I'm tired of recommendations." What was the point of preserving her health anyway? Every day on this planet was borrowed time. She'd rather feel the burn in her lungs, the sting in her eyes. At least it was honest. At least it matched the burning in her chest where her heart used to beat with purpose. She opened her mouth to refuse the mask again, when the throne room doors burst open in such violence they cracked against the walls. A contingent of palace guards rushed in, their blue faces flushed purple with exertion, their pointed ears flat against their heads in alarm. "Your Majesty!" Captain Dex, a veteran soldier whose face bore scars from the mining wars, could barely catch his breath. "Several human ships have entered our atmosphere without requesting permission. They're ignoring all communication requests." Zenora spun from the window, her hand instinctively moving to her throat. She and Zohik exchanged a loaded glance. Her advisor's face had gone pale again, his mind clearly racing through the same possibilities as hers. A diplomatic mission? An invasion? Earth had never been aggressive toward them, but then again, they'd never had ships enter Lovarian space unannounced. "Is this an attack?" she asked, voicing her voice to remain steady, even as her heart began pounding in an alternating rhythm. We don't think so, Your Majesty," Captain Dex replied, confusion overtaking his alarm. "They're not in attack formation, and the only message we received was..." He paused, looking more bewildered than she had ever seen him. "The only message said that Callan is returning home." "Why was that not the first thing you said, you stupid guard?" She seized the back of a chair for support, her legs suddenly unsteady. Kellen. Her son was coming back. But why? And why with multiple ships? "How many vessels?" Zohik demanded, already shifting into crisis management mode. 15 at last count, sir. More appearing on long-range sensors." Time seemed to fracture and accelerate simultaneously. Zenora found herself running through the palace corridors, her royal dignity abandoned completely. Her robes, heavy with ceremonial gemstones, hiked up in her hands as she ran. Zohik wheezed beside her, his many years showing in every labored breath. The maids followed, their younger legs easily keeping pace, though Kira kept calling out for her to slow down to maintain proper royal bearing. But Zenora couldn't slow down. Her son was coming home. They descended the grand staircase at a pace that threatened to send them all tumbling. Ancient portraits of dead monarchs watched their undignified flight with painted disapproval. Through the Hall of Treaties, where she'd signed Kellen's adoption papers, past the Chamber of Sorrows, where she'd mourned each miscarriage, around the Garden of Memory that Kellen had loved as a child, now withered and dead from the toxic air. Her lungs burned by the time they burst through the spaceport's main entrance. The massive facility, built in better times to welcome dignitaries and trade delegations, now mostly received emergency supply runs and evacuation ships. But today, it was alive. She stood at the observation platform, breathing hard, watching in stunned silence as human ships descended from the orange-tinged sky. They were beautiful vessels, sleek and silver, bearing Earth's blue and green insignia, their hulls unmarred by the constant abrasion of volcanic ash that scarred every Lovarian ship. They landed in perfect synchronization, their captains apparently unconcerned by the dangerous wind shears that made landing on Lovaria a nightmare. 5 ships. 10. 15, 20, they kept coming, filling landing pads that hadn't seen such traffic in decades. The lead ship's hatch opened first. She found herself holding her breath, her hands gripping the platform's railing until her knuckles went pale blue. And then, he was there. Kellen emerged from the ship, and for a moment, Zenora couldn't reconcile the man before her with the boy who'd left 4 years ago. He'd grown tall. Taller than most Lovarians, though that was typical for humans. His shoulders had broadened, his frame filling out with the kind of muscle that came from good nutrition and possibly physical training. He wore human clothes, but in Lovarian colors, deep blues and purples, that complemented rather than clashed with his pale pink skin. But it was his presence that had changed the most. He walked with confidence, purpose, like someone who knew exactly where he belonged in the universe. The scared 5-year-old she'd pulled from a wreck, the uncertain teenager who'd struggled with his identity. Both were gone, replaced by this assured young man. Without thinking, without any consideration for the hundreds of Lovarians now watching from windows and platforms, Zenora rushed forward and embraced him. Her arms wrapped around him with fierce possessiveness, and she was startled to realize she had to reach up now. When had he gotten so tall? "I'm back, Mother," he said softly, his voice deeper than she remembered, but still carrying that unique accent. The way he pronounced Lovarian words with a human accent, softening the sounds their language required. She pulled back to study him, her mother's eyes cataloging every change. His hair had grown past his shoulders, worn in the traditional Lovarian style he'd insisted on since he was 12. There was a new scar cutting through his left eyebrow. When had that happened? Had he been in a fight? An accident? 4 years of his life she knew little about. His strange human eyes, that brown color no Lovarian possessed, held new depths, secrets, and knowledge that hadn't been there before. But his smile, his smile was exactly the same. Slightly crooked, the left side always lifting higher than the right. Warm enough to make her chest ache with how much she'd missed it. "Why are you back?" The question came out harsher than she intended, her defensive walls slamming back into place. "Why would you return to this dying planet? You were free, Kellen. You were safe." He took her blue hands in his pale ones, and she noticed calluses that hadn't been there before. "Because I found a way to save you all, Mother. To save everyone." She searched his face for signs of delusion or false hope, but found only calm certainty. "What are you talking about? You are supposed to be at university, studying human engineering. You said your letters." I lied. The admission came easily, without shame. I haven't spent the past 4 years as a university student. I attended some classes, enough to send you those letters, but mostly, I've been working on this. Reconnecting with my birth family, building connections, gathering support for something I've been planning since the day you first showed me the projection models for Laveria's decay. "Kellen, what have you done?" The question emerged as a weak whisper. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more improbable than the last. "Uncle John can explain the details better than I can," he said, gesturing toward the ship. A middle-aged human man descended the ramp in slow steps. Zenora recognized him immediately, though he'd aged in the years since their last encounter. A courtroom on Earth, his face twisted with anger as the judge awarded her custody. John was Kellen's biological uncle, his dead mother's brother. He had the same brown eyes as Kellen, the same stubborn set to his jaw, and the same way of standing that suggested he wouldn't be moved by anything short of a planetary bombardment. "Queen Zenora," John said, inclining his head exactly the amount required to be considered polite. No more, no less. "I won't pretend there isn't any resentment between us. You took my nephew from me in court, fought us at every turn for custody. My family spent years believing you'd stolen him, turned him against us." Zenora straightened, preparing for a confrontation she wasn't sure she had the energy for. But John raised a hand. "But it's water under the bridge now," he continued, and something in his expression softened. "You raised him with love. You turned him into a fine man who spent the last 4 years convincing me and everyone else that his mother's people, were worth saving. And if you're willing to come with us on a little space journey, we can show you exactly what he means." A day later, Zenora still felt like she was living in someone else's fever dream. The journey had taken them through 3 hyperspace jumps to coordinates her ship's navigator didn't recognize. They'd passed through human-controlled space, where massive stations and terraformed worlds showcased the species' expansion, then beyond, into an area of space she'd never seen on any star chart. Now, Kellen stood before her in the ship's cargo bay, holding up a strip of cloth with an embarrassed smile. "I know it's theatrical," he said, "but I really want this to be perfect. Please, Mother." Against every instinct, against all logic, she let him tie the cloth over her eyes. She heard Zohic muttering in the old language. Probably prayers or curses. With him, it was hard to tell. John's heavier footsteps echoed on the metal floor, and she could hear the other humans moving around, whispering excitedly. Kellen guided her carefully down the ramp. The first thing she noticed was the air. It didn't burn. She took a deep breath, then another, waiting for the familiar sting of toxic gases. Nothing. The air was clean, carrying scents she hadn't experienced in decades. Vegetation, water, that particular smell of healthy soil. "Ready?" Kellen asked, and she could hear the obvious excitement in his voice, like when he was 10 and had successfully grown his first Lovarian flower in their palace greenhouse. He removed the covering. The sight before her defied every rational thought in her head. She stood on a hillside covered in purple grass, not the sickly brown of Lovaria's dying vegetation, but vibrant, healthy purple that rippled in a gentle breeze. The sky above was the perfect blue-purple twilight their species' eyes were designed for, with 2 moons hanging like jewels in the heavens. A river wound through the valley below, actual water sparkling in the moonlight, not the toxic sludge that currently passed for rivers on Lavaria. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks capped with snow that glowed faintly pink in the alien sunset. Forests of silver-barked trees spread across the landscape, their leaves so vibrant they reminded her of the gardens of her childhood, before the terraforming of her planet began to fail. "Welcome to New Lovaria," Kellen said, bouncing on his feet with an energy she hadn't seen since he was a child. "I acquired it for our people. For your people." He caught himself on the word, and she saw the flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Well, I know I'm human, but you know what I mean." "How?" The single word was all she could manage, her mind struggling to process the impossibility before her. John stepped forward, his expression serious. "Your Majesty, you have no idea the lengths this young man went to. He started a campaign on Earth that went viral. Save the species that saved me, he called it. He told the story of how you found him, raised him, loved him. How your entire species was dying because of a terraforming failure that wasn't your fault." John pulled out a human device, projecting holographic images into the air. "He raised 10 billion credits in crowdfunding. got endorsements from celebrities, scientists, politicians. He testified before the Earth Council, the Mars Assembly, even the Outer Colonies Parliament. He may have emphasized his unofficial status as Prince of Latveria, which technically wasn't a lie since you never formally removed him from succession. The images showed Kellen speaking to massive crowds, human faces rapt with attention. Videos of him at fancy dinners, shaking hands with people she recognized as Earth's elite. Pictures of protests outside government buildings, humans holding signs that read, "Save Latveria," and "Humanity remembers its debts." But this is an entire planet, Zenora said weakly, her legs suddenly unsteady. With a better atmosphere than Latveria had even before the failures, Kellen said, unable to contain himself any longer. Look, over there. Perfect for the new capital. The climate is ideal for Latvian's physiology. The gravity is 98% of what you're used to, and the volcanic activity is minimal and geologically stable. We can start evacuations immediately. He grabbed her hand, pulling her forward like he had as a child, wanting to show her something amazing. The southern continent has mineral deposits that make Latvia's best mines look poor. The oceans, yes, actual oceans, Mother. They're clean and full of life. There's enough arable land for every Latvian to have their own estate if they wanted. And look, enough. Zohik's sharp voice cut through Kellen's enthusiasm. The old advisor had been silent since they'd arrived, but now he strode forward, his red eyes blazing with indignation. This has gone far enough, young human. You think you can simply purchase a planet and play God with our species' future? You are not one of us. You never were, and you never will be. The joy drained from Kellen's face as Zohik continued his tirade. Do you have any conception of what you've done? The chaos you'll cause. You appear after 4 years of absence, acting like the prince you are not, making decisions for a species you don't belong to. The royal succession is already in chaos because of your mere existence. Princess Thara has spent years building legitimate claims for her children, and now you waltz in with your human money and human connections, thinking you can simply save us? As if we're pets in need of rescue? Kellen's shoulders slumped, and he nodded slowly. You're right, Advisor Zohik. I know my place. I'm not truly Latvian. I just... His voice cracked slightly. I just wanted to help. I couldn't stand the thought of you all dying while I live safely on Earth. That's all. Zenora stood frozen, her mind racing through a lifetime of tradition, duty, and bitter reality. She looked at the paradise around them, a world that could save her people. She looked at Zohik, representing centuries of tradition and pure bloodlines. She looked at Kellen, her son in every way that mattered, who had somehow achieved the impossible. The decision, when it came, felt like stepping off a cliff. You're wrong, Zohik. The advisor's mouth fell open. Your Majesty? If we can move our people to this planet, if Kellen has truly saved us from extinction, they will accept him. She moved slowly toward her son. You think they care about bloodlines when their children are dying from toxic air? You think they'll refuse salvation because it came from my son's hands? She reached up to cup Kellen's face, studying him with new eyes. I never expected you to be the prince, Kellen. Not because I didn't think you'd be a good ruler. You would be exceptional. I wanted to spare you our burden. I wanted you to have a normal life. A human life, free from the weight of being a leader in a dying world. She kissed his forehead, a gesture she performed thousands of times when he was young. But if this is what you really want, If you truly see yourself as responsible for our people, I can arrange for you to be the next king. A small smile played at her lips. That is, if you're willing to marry one of your cousins. Kellen laughed, bright and sudden. I've got nothing against it if this cousin is Vizara. Everyone stared at him. The casual mention of a very specific name, Princess Thara's eldest daughter, hung in the air like a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. What? Kellen asked, looking around at their shocked expressions. Then, with typical human obliviousness to Laverian propriety, he added, We're not really cousins. We kept in touch through video calls. I don't see the problem. The silence stretched on, filled with implications none of them were quite ready to process. Above them, the twin moons of New Laveria continued their eternal cycle, casting double shadows across a world of new hope. 5 years had passed since that day on the hillside, when Kellen had unveiled their new planet to his mother. Now, the retired Queen Zenora stood on the marble balcony of the recently built royal palace, watching the celebration unfold in the vast courtyard below. The palace itself was impressive, built in traditional Laverian style, but incorporating human engineering that made it earthquake-proof. Not that they needed to worry about earthquakes here. This new planet's geology was stable as its atmosphere was clean. Below, thousands of Laverians filled the courtyard and spilled into the surrounding streets. Their blue faces were bright, with genuine joy. Pointed ears perked forward in happiness. Children ran between the legs of adults, their laughter carrying up to where Zenora stood. She spotted several human children among them, their pink skins standing out, but no longer seeming strange. 5 years of constant commerce and attempted integration had normalized what was once unthinkable. At the center of it all, King Kellen and Queen Vizara walked among their people, not carried on a palanquin, not separated by guards, but walking, hand in hand through the crowd, stopping to talk with citizens, accepting flowers from children, sharing embraces with elderly Laverians who remembered them both as youngsters. Kellen's pale human hand, intertwined with Vizara's blue one, had become the symbol of their new world, the child saved by their queen and raised to become their king and savior. Vizara had grown into her role magnificently. Where once she'd been her mother Thara's pawn in succession games, she'd proven herself a formidable queen in her own right. Her long black hair was woven with both Laverian crystals and earth flowers, a crown that represented both worlds sitting naturally on her head. They make it look so easy, a familiar voice said beside her. Zenora didn't turn as Zohic joined her at the balcony's edge. The old advisor moved slower these days, though the clean air of this new planet had added years to his life that Laveria would have stolen. 5 years, Zenora mused. 5 years since we thought our species would die on that poisoned rock. Now, look at us. Below, a group of human engineers were demonstrating some new agricultural equipment to fascinated Laverian farmers. The evacuation should never have succeeded, Zohic said, his tone contemplative rather than critical. Moving 3 billion Laverians across the galaxy, establishing a new government, integrating with human colonists who were already here. It felt like an impossible task. And yet, here we are. Yes, Zohic said slowly. Here we are, with a human king. Zenora glanced at him, but there was no bitterness in his voice anymore. That had faded somewhere around year 3, when Kellen had personally negotiated the mining rights that made the new planet economically viable. Or perhaps when he'd stood firm against Earth's corporations trying to exploit Laverian refugees. Or maybe it was simply watching him work 18-hour days during the evacuation, personally overseeing the transport of the elderly and sick, ensuring no one was left behind. You raised him well, Zohic said suddenly. the words seemingly pulled from him against his will. Zenora turned to stare at him fully now. In all those years, Zohic had never once acknowledged her motherhood of Kellen as anything but a political mistake. The old advisor continued, his red eyes fixed on the celebrating crowds. He's not your son by blood, that's true. But he's cunning, wise beyond his years, patient in ways humans usually aren't. A small smile played at his blue lips. Do you know what I learned last week? He never actually dropped out of university. He completed his degree through distance learning while orchestrating the entire new planet acquisition. Graduated with honors. That sounds like him, Zenora said, her own smile matching his. He went back to Earth as a young man with very little, just the education you gave him and whatever connections an adopted alien prince could claim. By all rights, he should have disappeared into humanity's billions, forgotten about us. Zohic paused, watching as Kellen lifted a Lovarian toddler onto his shoulders, the child shrieking with delight. But he never forgot his roots, and in the end, he got everything he wanted. Zohic turned to face her directly. Maybe it was his plan all along. Even as a boy, he was always watching, learning, absorbing our politics like a sponge. Did you know he'd been corresponding with Vizara since he was 15? Zenora laughed, the sound rich with knowledge she'd kept to herself for years. Oh, Zoic, you still don't see the full picture, do you? The advisor frowned. What do you mean? You think this was just Kellen's plan? She gestured to the celebration below. My dear advisor, I'm not sure the exact extent of it, but I'd bet my former crown that my son and my niece planned and executed a complex political maneuver that ended with humanity saving our planet and their own marriage in their new home. Zoic's eyes widened. Vizara? But she was your enemy. He stopped, his brilliant political mind finally catching up. The correspondence. She fed him information about the succession crisis, about her mother's plans. They stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what had been accomplished. The music from below shifted to a human song, and Lovarian voices joined in, the pronunciation charmingly incorrect, but enthusiastic. Below, Kellen had finally given up on the traditional dance and was now teaching the crowd what appeared to be something called the electric slide, which looked ridiculous but had everyone laughing. Vizara watched with fond exasperation, occasionally correcting his form with the authority of someone who'd been secretly studying human culture for years. They protected one human child, so Earth declared the entire species under our guard, Zohic said suddenly. What? That's what the human media called it. The whole campaign. Apparently, it became something of a rallying cry. They saved one of ours, now we save all of theirs. He shook his head in wonder. Such a simple sentiment for such a complex operation. Zenora felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with New Lazak's perfect climate. She thought of that scared 8-year-old boy, clinging to her hand in a crashed escape pod, speaking words she didn't understand, but trusting her anyway. She thought of the teenage Kellen, frustrated at being different, but determined to bridge both worlds. She thought of the young man, who'd returned with a fleet of ships and an impossible dream. I suppose, she said softly. Sometimes the simplest sentiments are the truest. As if hearing her thoughts, Kellen looked up at the balcony. Even from this distance, she could see him smile, that same crooked grin that had won her heart 15 years ago. He raised his hand in a wave, and she returned it, queen to king, mother to son, past to future. The celebration would continue long into the night. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges. Trade negotiations with Earth, infrastructure development, the delicate balance of two species learning to truly live as one. But tonight, under the twin moons of this new planet, with the sound of human and Laverian voices raised in celebration, anything seemed possible. Zoic and Zenora stood together on the balcony, two relics of an old world, watching the new one bloom before them. Neither spoke again, but both felt it. The stunning weight of what had been accomplished. A dying species saved. Two worlds united. A mother's love repaid 1,000-fold. And somewhere in the crowd below, a human king and his Lovarian queen danced on, writing the next chapter of an impossible story that had begun with a single and unusual act of compassion and ended with the salvation of an entire species.